Hello and welcome to another fabulous EHN Canada webinar. My name is Jonathan and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on how to build an incredible workplace culture. For those of you who are long-standing attendees of our webinars, welcome back. For those of you who are new to EHN Canada, we are a leading nationwide network of treatment centers for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We offer inpatient services with centers coast to coast, as well as intensive outpatient and virtual options. For more information, visit our website at ehncanada.com. Everyone is on mute and cameras are turned off for today's webinar, but we'd like for you to use the Q&A box or the chat if the Q&A box is not working for you to submit your questions for our speaker throughout the session. We will be sending a follow-up email in the next week that will contain a link to the recording of today's session and your CEU certificate. To stay updated on our future webinars and newsletters, we invite you to opt into our mailing list by filling out the survey form that will be linked in the Q&A and the chat. I'm located in Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of several nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you are new to this work and want to find out whose land you are on or where you grew up, please visit www.native-land.ca. Now, very excited, let me introduce to you today's speaker. Helen Luidi brings nearly 30 years of experience in mental health and addiction to her role as Executive Director for EHN Canada, overseeing Guardians Atlantic and Bellwood, Nova Scotia. She holds a Master's of Social Work from Memorial University in Newfoundland and a Clinical Specialist designation from the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. Before joining EHN Canada, Helen worked extensively with Nova Scotia Health, spent over 20 years in academia, contributing to human rights, counseling services, and teaching political science. Since 2012, she has also run her own counseling and consulting business, delivering professional development sessions and presenting at conferences for diverse organizations. Helen's career reflects a deep commitment to improving access to care and fostering inclusive, trauma-informed environments. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over the stage to our good friend, Helen.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome to everybody that's joining us here today. So as Jonathan mentioned, today we're going to be talking about cultivating a culture of care and creating a healthy workplace when we look at client experience. So what some of the things we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be recognizing characteristics of both healthy and toxic workplace cultures. We're going to be talking about strategies to address toxic behaviors. We will look at understanding how to support staff with well-being and building resilience. We'll explore methods for continuous improvement through inclusivity, respect, and feedback. And we'll talk about assessing the impact of culture on client care and staff retention. So one of the questions that I want to ask you as an audience, is there anybody here that has ever had an experience of working in a culture that didn't foster a healthy workplace? And if so, what kind of experiences did you notice? I see some people are raising their hands.
Feel free just to let us know in the chat or in the Q&A. I see favoritism from Shalina.
Mm-hmm. No trust. Anything else? A lot of turnover, true. Little respect for work-life balance. Micromanagement. Disorganization. Burnout. No collaboration. Toxic. Yes, I can see that there, I think there's many people that I think we can all experience and we know that it feels pretty awful to work in a place where there is toxicity. You know, some people are saying things like resentment, inconsistent management, inconsistent application of rules, lack of consultation. There's so many ways that we experience it. And why does it matter to have a healthy workplace? You know, what are some of the important realities of ensuring that we work in a place that feels healthy? What are some of the things that we want to see? We've heard all kinds of words about what it looks like to be toxic, but why is it important to work in a healthy workplace? sense of belonging, increased innovation, creativity and effectiveness for sure, less stress, more motivation. Employee satisfaction leads to productivity 100%, engagement, transparency. I like that. A sense of purpose. We feel respected, feel part of a bigger plan. I love some of those answers. And I can honestly say fewer sick days, 100%. I can honestly say I certainly have had opportunities where I worked in a setting that didn't feel very healthy. It didn't feel very respectful. And I don't think I realized how bad it felt until I got out of that workplace relationship. And some of the things that it really taught me was the importance of doing everything that I could as a leader to make sure that, um, regardless of where we work, we want to make sure that we're doing our best to create and foster inclusivity and foster respect and foster the healthiest workplace that we can. Now, sometimes when we come into a workplace, it doesn't always feel like that when we first are there, or it may develop into a place that doesn't feel very good to work in. And some of the reasons of why it matters and why we need to pay attention to workplace culture, some of you have mentioned in the chat, we spend a lot of time in the workplace. I mean, let's be honest. Um, you know, even when you're working from home, we interact with people that we work with on a daily basis, probably more time during the day than we spend with our family and our loved ones and our friends. We spend a lot of time with folks that we work with. And if we are not working in a healthy environment, some of the things that you're saying are right. There is high turnover. We see more sick days. We see a lack of motivation. We see people that just disengage. So if we look at things like reducing burnout, reducing turnover, we try to foster a setting that is respectful. And we look at trying to provide a safe and supportive environment. All of that really comes down to excellence when it comes to client care or customer care, however we want to frame it, depending on what kind of workplace we are belonging to. The healthier the workplace is, the happier we feel, the happier our workers feel. And when our workers feel happy and they feel satisfied with their work and they feel valued, that really does result to a huge difference when it comes to client care. So, how do we recognize toxicity in the workplace? And this is some of the things that you folks have already mentioned in your chat. We see common indicators. We see things like high turnover, burnout, distrust, blame shifting, lack of respect. Those are some of the things that we see this all of the time. We just see people that, you can feel an energy and it feels really unhealthy. It feels draining. I always say that I'm an energy person, and you can feel an energy shift in an unhealthy workplace where it feels like the energy is being sucked out of you, as opposed to in a healthy environment, you go to work and you may be working really hard, but you actually feel energized with what you're doing. You actually feel like you're giving something and you're contributing. The impact of staff and clients, toxic behaviors harm staff. Mental health can really be impacted, and it can negatively impact our client recovery as well. So for us working in recovery centers, when we look at our workplaces, if our staff is not healthy, I always say, how do we model a healthy workplace and a healthy recovery center for our clients if our staff are not feeling valued and our staff are not feeling healthy? So I guess the next part is we really want to recognize what are some of the warning signs to help us notice and pay attention when our workplaces are not at their healthiest, or maybe they are starting to become a little bit more stressful. It's important to recognize and address those behaviors as early as possible and prevent issues from being ingrained. So if I can ask you folks once again, what do you think some of the early signs are that you would notice if, once a somewhat healthy workplace starts to go downhill a little bit and starts to feel a little bit more unhealthy before it gets to the place of being like completely toxic. Is there anything that you think you would notice? Mm, gossip. That's a huge one. Increase in sick days. Yeah. Apathy. Huge. Not wanting to go to work in the morning. Absent staff. Not feeling like going to work that day. 100%. Attitude. There's a shift in attitudes. Yeah. A lack of engagement. Yeah, you see people almost look like they're checked out, poor concentration. So that it may show up as, um, you know, you may see their performance go downhill. Top heavy remanagement, lack of participation in activities, people not contributing in meetings. Yeah, people check out. Mental health issues increase for sure. Increase in disability and WCB claims. Yeah. Staff coming in late, leaving early, not communicating as much. No, those are all excellent, excellent examples. Sorry. So when we look at some of these strategies for addressing behavior, we really need to pay attention. When we start seeing these warning signs and we start seeing things like the decreased motivation or increased sick time, or we start noticing things like there's gossip and we start just picking up on some of these cues. We notice people aren't maybe jumping in and helping out the way that they did before. Maybe again, productivity is decreasing. Oftentimes, I think what we see is, we're noticing it in behavior such as performance. And I always say, like, what's the underlying issues? Why is it that we're seeing poor performance, especially if it's something that is a newer behavior, right? Because if people are generally performing quite well and we start to see a shift, I think the important thing is we have to ask ourselves, why is that? So, one of the things that I always talk about is we have to try to figure out what is the why. How do we start to identify what that root cause is? Why are things so toxic? Sometimes it can be one or two people that really are creating such negativity amongst a whole lot of people. So I think we need to be really clear when we set our expectations. And not only do we have to be clear about setting expectations, but we need to follow through. We need to have very open communication with people about what our expectations are. Because sometimes, as leaders, sometimes we have ideas in our minds about, this is what we expect, this is what we want. And we fall into the trap of thinking that everybody else on our team is on the same page and can read our mind. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. We think that we're really clear. We think that everybody knows what we're talking about, but the way that other people are receiving the information is just not nearly as clear. I always joke and say it's kind of like my singing. When I sing, honest to God, in my head, it sounds amazing. And when it comes out of my mouth, apparently it doesn't sound so great. It sounds nothing like it does when it's in my head. And that's what people tell me. And when people joke and say, Helen, you're just being modest, it's like, no, trust me, I'm not being modest. I get told enough how terrible of a singer I am, but in my head, it sounds fantastic. I think our communication is like that sometimes. We think we're being really clear because in our head, it really makes sense. But if we follow through with the other individuals and we ask them, what their understanding of our conversation was, sometimes we're not nearly as clear as we think we are. So it's important to have that open communication and check in and ask for feedback. We need to really have accountability and follow through. Those are very important components. And some of you have mentioned in the chat that, it's when people are not feeling heard, if people are feeling micromanaged, that's where we start really seeing things go downhill. So we need to have accountability. And if we fail to communicate something, or if we don't have the open communication, or we don't set clear expectations, we have to own that. And it's okay to own it and say, you know what? I kind of messed this one up. I didn't follow through with you. I really apologize. And really take that accountability. And the follow through, I think, is something that really is valuable as well. So, in some of those strategies, is there anything that maybe you have tried that's not listed that you think could really work when it comes to addressing toxic behaviors over and above like being very open with your communication, setting clear expectations, identifying what those root causes are, and taking accountability and expecting follow through? Is there anything different that some of you might be able to point out that would be a little different? Sometimes people don't feel heard because we don't do that is an excellent point. That's a conversation that I had with some staff only recently, and they were saying, "Helen, you're not hearing me." And I said, "No, I think this is where we're disagreeing. It's not that I'm not hearing you, I'm not agreeing with you. So it's okay that we have different points of view. That doesn't mean that we're not heard. It means that we disagree. Polarizing issues." Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. But I think sometimes they can be very, very different. And sometimes I find we may all be wanting the same thing, and we may have different approaches of how we do it. And sometimes there's judgment attached to that. And people get into a mindset of thinking that there is a right way and a wrong way of doing things. And I guess one of the things that I always look at is like, how do we find our commonalities? How do we find our common ground? What are some of the things that we can do to really ask ourselves, are we on the same page and just trying to approach it in different ways? Is that a possibility? When we look at some of the core elements in healthy work cultures, a huge one is safety and trust. And as staff, we have to feel safe. And feeling safe also means feeling valued and feeling trusted in your work. So I think I recall somebody had mentioned being micromanaged as a sign of an unhealthy workplace or a place that could turn into a toxic work culture. Why do we think being micromanaged is something that contributes to an unhealthy workplace? What are your thoughts on that? Lack of trust, huge. Hmm. Makes you feel incompetent. Yeah. Lack of trust. Trust is huge. Lack of trust. I'm seeing that as a common theme. And the one word I see for that, it's micromanage suggests that there's no trust and you're capable of doing. I didn't get the rest of it. But I think that controlling, that's the word I'm really looking for. When I see micromanage, I see issues about control. When I see a person that wants to micromanage, it puts you on the defensive all the time, 100%. Um, when we're being micromanaged, there is a feeling like you can't do it yourself. You're not competent. You can't do the job as well as, the other person. And the person who's micromanaging, it's so much about power and control, right? And I remember having a conversation with a former manager of mine where I said, I had to be very transparent and say, well, why did you hire me if you don't feel that I'm capable of doing the job? If you feel that I'm capable of doing the job, let me do the job. And if you don't feel that I'm capable of doing the job, then that's where we must part ways, right? Nobody wants to be in a place where you're feeling micromanaged. Now, that also means that it's important to have clear communication with our team members and empower our team members to be able to make decisions and to show them that you trust them and to show them that you value their input, right? And sometimes that can take more work. You hire intelligent people to tell you what to do, not to yes. Yes. I like that. And Jonathan, I might not be getting all of the answers, so feel free to jump in.
You're
Um,
getting all the answers, Helen. You're doing great.
awesome. When it comes to clear communication, some of the things I think is so valuable is that there's managers with less experience than their frontline staff, and they feel, yeah, and I think people feel threatened by that. I think sometimes, when folks feel threatened, you may see them, that's when you see them micromanage, or that's when you see people are afraid to have people more intelligent than they are in the room. And I always tell my staff, it's like, look, just so you know, I want to have all kinds of people that are way more smarter than I am in the room because, I think that's good business. I want to make sure that there's a complement so that, I know what my strengths are. I also know where my areas are that really need improving. And when I have other team members that can contribute to that part of it, hey, that's fantastic. There is a lack of self-confidence, I think, with people. So when it comes to clear communication, we do want to have really transparent policies, right? And I always say, policies, we also want to have policies, but we also want to have guidelines because sometimes we create policies and people see policies in terms of absolutes when with guidelines, guidelines really kind of give us like a roadmap to how to get this done. So we have to know the difference between a policy and a guideline because policies are more absolute and guidelines are more of a roadmap. We want to have regular feedback and clear expectations. So I recall working with some workplaces in the past, and some of the things that I would see is that they would say, we have regular feedback because we do annual performance appraisals. And, that is how we prove that we give regular feedback. And I'm just thinking, wow, in all honesty, if we have to wait a full year to get some feedback, we're kind of failing, right? The way that I look at it, I think that nobody should ever be surprised if you are in an organization that does performance appraisals, nobody should ever be surprised about what is happening or what the expectations are or what somebody believes is going well or not well with regards to your performance. And I know that there was one workplace that I was at for probably about 20 years, and in all the time there I didn't get any feedback at all. So you don't know if you're doing a good job, a poor job. Every now and then you'd get like more work piled on you, so you think, okay, well, that must be a good sign. But it's really important to have feedback, whether that's positive or it's constructive feedback. It's still so important because as part of that communication. And it's no different than any other type of relationship. In a relationship, we always have to give feedback about what's working, what areas do we need to improve on? Just having the conversations like, okay, how did this go today? So, for example, in our organization, there was an incident that happened last night. And so we did a check-in with our clients early in the morning and then a check-in with our staff to say, okay, how's everyone feeling about this? What happened last night? Let's talk about that. What went well? What kinds of things, were misses that maybe we need to kind of work on? Is there something in there that we might need to do some follow-up with? So again, it's trying to make sure that we make that space and make that time. And it takes a lot of work to do the communication on a regular basis. But if we put the work in on the front end, it really does help create a healthier workplace. So having that regular feedback and really being clear in our expectations, those things are really important. Is there anything about the clear communication that maybe we've missed, or another idea that one of you may have that could be beneficial to somebody in the audience? What other kind of communication do you think people could benefit from? And I know in the run of a day, sometimes it gets hard to communicate with folks because people are so busy doing their work that if they don't have regular run-ins with an individual, it's really easy not to have a good communication. So we might have to have a variety of communication styles. So for example, we may need to use email. I like this. We have weekly supervision, recognition for good work done. Yeah, we can't take that for granted. Check-ins. Love it. Yeah, and again, doing it by a variety of ways. Like, if we can't, my manager checks in with me a couple of times a week. Yeah, just even little check-ins. I remember working in one place and the HR manager, consistent messaging, follow-up. One of the things he talked about, he used to say, I like to do management by walking around. And he made it part of his routine every day was he would come into work, he would go down to the cafeteria and get a coffee. And some people thought like, "Ugh, this is just his morning coffee run." It wasn't about his morning coffee run. What it really was about was making connections with people. So walking down to that cafeteria and kind of poking his head in the door along the way. Hey, how you doing? Good morning. What's going on? How was your weekend? How are you? Oh, you look nice today. And that was part of his schedule every day. And some people just thought that, oh God, that's just him wasting time. And he and I shared a conversation. He said, Helen, this is nothing about wasting time. This is purposeful. I protect that time every morning. It's not about the coffee. I can get the coffee anywhere. It's about making those connections. So again, having a variety of ways of doing it. So in this age of like digital communication, it's easy to get lost in that personal connection, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it in other ways, just the way we're doing it right now virtually. And I know we work in a team where, EHN is all across Canada. And I feel lucky enough that I can still connect with some of my colleagues, whether they're in Toronto or whether they're in Nanaimo or whether they're in the Rockies. We can connect virtually, but it still feels nice to have the in-person meetings as well, or being able to pick up an individual Teams call or send out an email. And again, it's regular communication, right? Making that time and protecting that time. And even if there's not a lot to really talk about when it comes to a full agenda, let's not cancel meetings because there's not a full agenda. Because sometimes without having a real set agenda, we are accomplishing so much more than we even thought we could because we have that opportunity to have the organic conversation. And that's where safety kind of evolves and people feel closer. So when we look at empathy and compassion, a culture that cares really cares for both our clients or customers or patients, whoever it is that we're serving, and our staff. And if people say, customers come first, really everybody should be coming first. Yes, our customers come first, but we also have to make sure that we look after our staff because a happy staff means that they are going to be putting their customers and clients first, and they are going to be energized to be able to do that. So when we look at leadership and team support, I can't stress enough how important it is for leaders to model a positive work culture. We have to lead by example. We can't be, always, what does it do as I say, not as I do? We can't be the folks that tries to put things in place, but we don't follow the same kinds of processes ourselves. We have to make sure that we have regular check-ins and supportive supervision that reinforces connection and trust. And when things go wrong, not if, but when things go wrong, we have to be able to approach it in a way that like, okay, let's talk about that. What happened? Let's talk about, how did yesterday go? What were the things that went well? Where are the areas that we maybe were misses and we might need to kind of work on an improvement? And again, elicit some of that feedback from your team members instead of coming in with like, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. Oftentimes, the people that may have had a trouble with something or they dropped the ball on something, they're going to know it themselves well before anybody points it out to them. So give them that opportunity, show them that trust, show them that respect. Recognize, and I think somebody said this in the chat, recognize and celebrate the small wins to boost morale, right? As leaders, it's important to be cheerleaders. It's important. We can't just assume that everybody knows that we respect them or that we appreciate them. We need to tell them. And you know what? It doesn't mean that we always have to do big, grand gestures to appreciate somebody. It doesn't mean that, we have to give gift cards out to everybody or give them gifts or buy pizzas. Sometimes it's about like giving a shout out to somebody, maybe it's something in a weekly email to say, I want to give a big shout out to a couple of people on our team today that went over and above. And this is some of the things that they did. I remember working one time in palliative care. And working in palliative care can be really draining and really exhausting. But one of the things that just made it really amazing, every Friday during our rounds, we had a little envelope that during the week, one of our staff members could notice when another staff member did something really cool. that wasn't necessarily part of the job description, but they just did a really nice thing, either for a patient or for another staff member. So, for example, one of our patients that were in palliative care, they were at end of life. And this patient was somebody who he always had his hair dyed. And it was something that was so important to him. And obviously, he was very ill. He couldn't get out and get his hair dyed. And one of the conversations he was having, and we kind of shared it one day, is that he was really upset because he didn't want to die with gray hair. And that might sound like something that is just not very important to somebody else, but one of the nurses on the team, she came in that evening on her time off and she had some Just for Men with her and she dyed his hair. Well, he was that happy. So, as staff members, we recognized like that was a huge shout out. Like, and again, we made sure that we made a big deal of it in rounds and we all celebrated, like, wow, that's amazing. Like, good for you that you did that. She didn't have to do that. And she didn't do it for the recognition, but it sure felt good when she got the recognition. So it's those kinds of things. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture, but noticing like when somebody is doing something good or when somebody is going over and above, noticing those things are just as important as giving constructive criticism when things are not working well. We hear a lot about inclusivity and respect in the workplace. And this is the kind of stuff that inclusivity and respect really fosters a healthy workplace. We want to promote an inclusive environment where diverse backgrounds and ideas are valued, right? And one of the things that I talk about with our own staff, especially our staff was really like when I first came on board, they were going through some hard times. And we wanted to talk about, okay, when there's differences of opinions, how do we handle that? And wouldn't it be like not a great workplace if we all thought exactly the same way? So it's so important to look at a diverse culture because we want to really be able to see things from another person's lens. We want to be able to see things from another person's perspective. We want to be as representative as we possibly can to the culture that we're serving. And just really recognizing like and where an innovative idea comes from can be really important. We want to make sure that we're encouraging collaboration, mutual respect as a standard for all team interactions, not just like this is like it's a good thing to try. It should be a standard. And we have to really be very conscientious of our biases and address any bias or disrespect quickly and transparently. And I'll give an example and then I'm going to invite you to throw out some examples as well. So one of the things that I noticed with the team that I was working with was that there was, I guess, a person on the team who was a little bit more firm in their approach, and there was other people on the team that kept saying this person was a bully. And I'd hear this all the time, so and so's a bully, so and so's a bully. Well, I heard this so much, and then I started noticing that other people started treating this person as if they were a bully. So, it's all about being very transparent and saying, okay, let's talk about this. First of all, there is processes in place. If there truly is a complaint that needs to be made about somebody being a bully or harassing in the workplace, there are firm guidelines and there's policies, and there is a responsibility not to turn a blind eye or condone that. And there is a way to address that. Now, other than that, is it possible that there's already a bias that's created and a narrative that's created about an individual because you're choosing not to address these concerns directly with the person? How do we foster a positive environment if we just allow this kind of talk behind somebody's back to continue? Somebody mentioned it's kind of high school behavior. It is. And my point is there's two ways of doing it. If it truly is an issue of harassment, then hey, we deal with it in that direct way. And that's what the policies are there for. But other than that, we have to be able to make sure that we foster open communication and to be able to have those difficult conversations. And just because it's a difficult conversation doesn't mean that it's a case of harassment or bullying. It's a difficult conversation, but we want to work in workplaces that foster those kinds of difficult conversations where that kind of diversity is something that is valued, right? So we have to be direct in our communication, and we have to be open to having those difficult conversations, and to be able to say, like, Jonathan, can I give you some feedback about that meeting back there? I was a little uncomfortable about the way that you approached me. So can we talk about that? And just be very direct about it. And again, it doesn't have to be a horrible situation. It doesn't have to be, something that turns out badly. And I guess for me, doing human rights for about 10 years, it was so interesting because I was somebody that I probably was terrified of conflict in my younger days. I did everything to avoid conflict. And there I was actually, working in an environment that I had to specialize in managing conflict. So I had to kind of learn very quickly that conflict doesn't necessarily have to be bad, right? It's about still maintaining respectful boundaries, having the open and difficult conversations with the hopes of trying to get to a better place of understanding and respect. It can be difficult with a micromanager on a power trip. And that's where we really have to come into play. And even having those kinds of conversations can be really challenging, but there is ways of being coached to be able to have those difficult conversations with some of the micromanagers that have the power struggles. And it may mean that you may have to bring somebody else into the conversation. Okay, the difficult conversations. Sorry, I missed that first part about the difficult conversations. I know it's really challenging to have that. And if there's anybody here that's in a leadership position, I definitely put way more on our leaders to make sure that as leaders, we really have to model having those difficult conversations. And if we don't know how, it's important that we reach out for coaching to say, okay, you know what? And it's something I had to work on too, because like I said, I was an avoider when it came to conflict. So I had to learn how to have difficult conversations with people. And, I worked in academia. I worked in a setting where I really felt like, and I was really young when I started. And it was really intimidating because, some of the people that I was having really difficult conversations with, they were people that were my professors just a couple of years before. And I felt really intimidated when I first started. So it took a lot of practice. I can't pretend that it didn't. It wasn't something that came easy to me. But the one thing that I can say is that I know it's something that can be learned because I was somebody that learned that being direct can come off as being mean in some staff. It does. Being and that's the issue that I see sometimes, that sometimes when somebody is direct, other people may perceive that as, well, that person's a bully because they're direct. And it's like, well, are they being a bully or are they being direct? Right. And sometimes it comes down to, this is where we have to be careful about bias too, because we really have to ask ourselves, is there something about that person that we have our own bias about? Is that about a gender difference, right? Is that about a racial difference that we have our own bias about? We really have to be introspective to really check ourselves, to ask, why are we so uncomfortable with this person? So we have to be able to ask ourselves the hard questions and then be able to engage in the difficult conversations with others. This is where continuous professional development and feedback really come into play and really are such an important part of any workplace, right? Professional development opportunities that empower, we need to empower like things like staff, our staff, and we have to like improve on the care that we're providing for our staff, the care that we're providing for our clients. But sometimes our professional development is about how we progress as an individual. What are some of the things that I need to work on? So it may be things like professional development, may be things like, if I'm not feeling my best, I may not be thinking my best, I might not be behaving my best. So maybe my professional development needs to be about things that I can do to recognize my own distress levels, and how I can have difficult conversations with people, and how, if I have too much on my plate, maybe during those times, I am reacting more to other people in a way that I didn't expect. And I keep saying, like, we work in an environment where people are there for recovery. And one of the conversations I had this morning, it's like, okay, we have to help re-navigate some of the concerns when I hear, you are triggering me, because that's something that we hear quite often. So it's like, okay, instead of you are triggering me, we have to take ownership. I'm having a reaction. And we have to be owning our own feelings instead of always assuming that it's somebody else's fault. And if we're struggling, our reactions may be stronger in those moments. Regular feedback and transparent communication, those are the things that foster growth and accountability, right? And communication, we talked a lot, especially in the chat, I've seen about micromanagers and people with control, powered control. Communication really needs to be a two-way street. When we talk about communication, in order to have real communication, there needs to be transmitters and receivers, right? And we need to be both. We need to be a good transmitter where we're able to articulate our thoughts and our feelings. And we also have to be prepared to be receivers. We have to be able to be receiving information that people are giving us, feedback that people are giving us. So it really takes fostering both of those skills to really empower somebody when it comes to communication. And it doesn't matter what kind of position you're in, we have to be able to have like an equal playing field where as a leader, you're demonstrating giving feedback and receiving feedback. And as a staff member, being able to give and receive feedback. And know that it's really important to do that in any kind of a healthy relationship. And I think it is important also that we're using measurable goals for workplace culture so that we can celebrate the progress. So one of the things I say to my staff is that, okay, if we're looking at a goal that you're working on, how are we going to know when you get there? And that's not just because, oh, we're ticking off a box for performance management. It's really about we want somebody to know when they're actually meeting their goals and meeting their performance indicators. And we want to be able to give that feedback. This is what you identified that you want to work on this year, and this is where you were, so that we can be very clear about what that looks like. Is there any other ideas that you may have about what kind of feedback or professional development could be helpful to foster a healthy workplace? Any other ideas? So workplace cultures, it really can move from toxic to thriving. It really can. It is something that it takes a lot of work and it takes continuous feedback, continuous ways of really being able to model how to give and receive feedback. It includes having both forms of communication of being both transmitter and receiver. It is about being clear and articulate and ensuring that expectations and policies and guidelines are clear. And if they're not clear, then you work on changing them. A healthy workplace culture is possible with a commitment to that clear communication. We need the support, that inclusivity, and ensuring that we have diverse voices at the table and accountability. So positive culture, it really does impact both staff and clients. And the more we can work on a more positive culture and the happier our staff are, the happier our clients and our customers and our patients will be as well. I just saw something in the chat. Management team can hire a therapist who understands group. Yeah, it's so interesting because for me with a therapy background, oftentimes at therapy and conflict management background, I really do I can't imagine how challenging it would be if those skills weren't there because I always say a good 80% of my job is I'm probably doing therapy with some of my team members. And the conflict management piece is huge. But again, even if the manager doesn't have it, there's still people that you can identify that have these skills that can provide the coaching. And that's what's so important too. So one person may not have all the skills, and that's where it's so important to recognize people's strengths and the things that maybe you're not so good with. It's okay not to be great at everything. That's where you need to know, okay, who are the people that I can lean on? Whether it's inside my organization or outside my organization, who can I lean on? Who can I bring in to help provide some opportunities for coaching in this area? If it's something about having difficult conversations, identifying that we need to bring somebody in to do like a little professional development on how to navigate a difficult conversation with somebody. So those are some things that we can really try to do to make sure that we are addressing things in the best way possible, and knowing that there's not one person that's going to possess every one of those skills. And that's okay. One person doesn't have to, which is why it's so important to know the skill set of a whole team of people. And if you don't have it within your own team, it's okay to look outside of your team. Because I think that's what it's all about, is including, that diversity, that diverse lens. That's something that, whether it's inside your organization or outside, again, it's bringing in those other perspectives and the other skill sets, because it really complements the team that you already have. Is there any questions about that? I promised that I would be finishing up by about to give enough time for a good 15 minutes of questions. So I think I'm giving 13 minutes. But is there any comments or any feedback? I hope you got something out of it, Hannah.
I got so much out of it, Helen. I thought it was really, really amazing. Um, I actually have a bit of a question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And for whoever is thinking or mulling over some questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat. Vicky, I see your hand up. Yeah, if you just want to throw it into the Q&A or chat, we'll get to that question right away. I guess the question I have is, like, moving from that individual contributor role in a company to, starting to be a manager, starting to be a leader. As a leader higher up, how are we trained? Like, what's the best way to train new leaders and sort of build some of these skills in early on?
I think that's where we need to pay attention to the conversations early on, right from the very beginning when we start a work relationship with an individual. It's about making sure that we create space for giving and receiving feedback and modeling the skills, so having those open conversations. So being able to say, like, okay, Jonathan, I just noticed in our conversations, this is what happened today. Can I get some feedback on what did you think about my approach there? Was I okay there? Like, did I come across too harsh when I had that conversation with folks? So you have to be able to ask feedback and elicit feedback, because that's how you're going to start, like, training folks and modeling for folks that it's okay to ask, and then we just start trying to be as transparent as possible and having regular communication. But one of the things that I keep trying to encourage with our own leadership team at our sites in Atlantic is every week I start off our leadership meeting saying, like, okay, do we have any feedback that we want to either give or receive for our team? How are we doing? Is there anything this week that maybe we didn't get a chance to kind of give feedback to? Is there anybody that we need to, have a conversation with? So we start off our meetings about giving and receiving feedback. Is there any feedback that anybody wants to give to me today?
So it sounds like there's a training piece and a professional development piece, but it also sounds like as a leader, it's important to model a lot of those skills, because those are things that will sort of happen through osmosis with newer and emerging leaders as well, or maybe even new leaders to the company.
Absolutely. And to be able to identify when somebody is struggling, that's where, we're always afraid of having difficult conversations about performance improvement plans, for example. But that's where it's important to identify if somebody needs some support in that, then we can identify, okay, well, if you need some coaching in this particular area, maybe it's how to approach somebody that is a bit more intimidating, for example. Let's work on that and identify that as a goal for you to be able to work on having some of those difficult conversations.
That's great. We actually have a few questions here as well, so
Okay.
I'll start scrolling through those.
Sure.
And the first one is from Angela, and thank you everyone for putting your questions in. We have 9 minutes left, so if there are some questions you have, feel free to put them into the chat or the Q&A. I'm reading them. We'll get to them. So from Angela, do you have any resources that you feel would be beneficial for a leader/director to use and to teach/model with?
I think if you're using resources on basic conflict resolution. I think that's something that's so valuable. I think every leader, every manager should have some basic skill set on conflict resolution. So again, being able to have difficult conversations, how to start these conversations. I know that we used to have an organization in the Atlantic region. It was called ADR, Alternate Dispute Resolution, and they had so much good feedback. But if you just Google dispute resolution, conflict management, there's some really good articles that you might be able to come across.
Love that.
Sarah has to run.
Next from Julia, can you expand on how you handle situations where a staff member seems checked out and the team is complaining about them? That's an interesting one.
Yes, and I can tell you my approach is very direct. So if I see that, and I have seen that, it's been a challenging year with our team. So we have definitely come from a team that had a lot of distrust when I first came, and I think it's a much healthier team at this point, which is great to see. But let's say, for example, Jonathan, you were the team member that I was noticing this with. I don't wait. I don't wait to see if it's going to come around. I will schedule a meeting, ask you to come and chat and just say, Jonathan, okay, this is what I've been noticing. I've been noticing that it seems like you're checked out. I'm also getting reports from some other staff members that this is happening, that's happening. So I'm very specific about what it is that I'm noticing. I don't just, go with what's going on. I'm very specific about what it is that I'm noticing. And then I just come out and ask, is everything okay? Is there something that you might need some support in? Have you noticed this as well? So I try to give an opportunity for them to be able to reflect and to be able to ask. And then I will be very honest and ask them, is there something that I can do to help support you with this? And I'll ask the question, and then I'll be very clear at the end of it with what the expectation is. So Jonathan, I know you're struggling with this. You mentioned that, you have a mom who's very sick right now. I really can appreciate that. If there's anything we can support you with, maybe you need some extra time off. But in the meantime, when you're here, I'm just going to let you know that don't forget, you've got to make sure that these things happen while you are at work. But if there's a way that we can support you, and then talk about the other supports that we have. So again, trying to come up with a plan and then follow it up with an email just to kind of say, I'm here for you, because you want it to be supportive. And you don't want it to come from a place of judgment. It's about problem solving together. How can we figure this out?
I think that's great, Helen. And I think a lot of times, those big conversations, we might have an idea in our mind of what somebody may be going through, but by asking the questions they suggested in more of an open-ended way, it could be that it's not about work at all that is the reason that they're disengaged. And by asking it in that way, you sort of open the opportunity to have an open discussion, a coaching conversation, and it's one without judgment. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Next from Annalisa. I did have an experience with a micromanager for about a year. I felt very powerless. I felt like I was in survival mode. I figured out what she wanted from me and tried to provide it so there was less conflict. It was demoralizing. Any advice for what to do in that situation?
That is probably one of the most challenging situations that you're going to deal with, is the micromanager. And I think being very direct again. And I know I had a situation where I had a micromanager for about a year, and I had to be very direct with her and said, I noticed that, you're doing my job with this, this, and this. Now you hired me to do this. Is there an issue with trust? Are you okay? Is there something about my style that's maybe getting in the way? Are you feeling that you can't trust that I'm going to get the job done? So again, I'm asking her the question and I'm eliciting that feedback. And in our situation, it came down to, she was very clear with me that she has power and control issues. So it's like, okay, great. You have power and control issues. I have issues with being micromanaged. We need to come up with a plan. And it's just very direct about that. And I think the direct approach is the best approach. And it doesn't have to be a confrontational thing. It's just your approach, okay, let's talk about this. This is what I'm noticing. And if we stick to the behaviors that we're noticing, as opposed to, you're a micromanager, you're controlling. Do you see the difference in how we receive it when we stick with, Jonathan, these are the behaviors that I've noticed from you, as opposed to, what is your problem, Jonathan? Why are you being such a controlling micromanager? It's just a different approach.
I love that. Thank you, Helen. We have one more question I see, and we do have a few minutes left. So if anybody does have any questions, we still have a little bit of time. This question's from Gina. Any suggestions on where to learn more about conflict management? So maybe I'm new to understanding that space. Where should I go to learn more?
I remember years ago, and this is back when I was in my university world, Royal Roads University actually had they had a lot of courses on conflict management. I don't know if they still do, but there were so many courses that I took through Royal Roads University, and it was fantastic. But honestly, there's a lot of emerging research on conflict management, and there's a lot of places that are doing conflict management. And I know I did a whole course, a whole certificate program at St. Mary's University here in Halifax, where it was all on alternate dispute resolution, mediation, how to manage conflict in the workplace. So there's a lot of universities that have certificate programs. It's just a matter of trying to Google that and find out which place might be close enough to you or that you can do it virtually.
It's fantastic. Well, Helen, that does it for the questions today. Oh, one more.
Okay.
Here we go. From Angela. What if you have a main leader and everyone knows her style is extremely direct, somewhat hard, and not loved? Just some thoughts on how to manage.
I think again, being very direct with that leader, and letting them know, you know what, Jonathan, I know that your style is really direct, and we appreciate how direct you are. But having said that, there's some people that are really struggling because they're feeling a little bit intimidated, and I know that could be their issue that they're struggling with that. Is there a way that we can kind of soften the approach for some folks that are finding it more challenging, right? And again, especially if you have somebody that's more comfortable in the style, you may have to engage some help to be able to have that conversation if it's a leader, because I know it can be very intimidating if there's a power differential. So you may need to engage some help from your HR department, from other leaders that are there that might be able to help facilitate the conversation. And if you need to reach outside of your organization, that's an opportunity too, where you can get somebody to help you be able to frame where you can go to have that conversation.
Fantastic. Helen, thank you so much. This was fabulous. Thank you everyone for joining another EHN Canada webinar. It will be available on our site at ehncanada.com within the next week or so, and you'll receive a follow-up email as well with the CEU credit, as well as links and a follow-up survey. Happy Thursday, everyone. Helen, again, thank you so much, and
Thank you,
we'll
and
see you all
thanks to
soon.
everybody. Take care.